Josh, could you do the roll call, please?
Rachel Arizmendi. Ashley Bourne. Here. Don Bransford. Here. Don Cameron. Here. Nancy Cassidy. Helene Dillard. Mike Gallo. Here. Crystal Haling. Eric Holst. Jeff Huckabee. Bryce Lumberg. Martha Montoya. Joyce Sterling. Andy Thulin. And Christopher Valadez. We do not have a quorum.
Thank you, Josh. But we know we will. It'll just take a little bit longer this morning. So you have well, we can't approve the minutes. So Secretary Ross, would you like to do the departmental update?
Sure, I'll be very brief today. First of all, for those of you who served with Marvin Myers, may he rest in peace. And for those of you who didn't know him, what an example of what a great agriculturalist and citizen and human being he was. His generosity just is unbelievable. And he was so passionate about students and education and ag literacy and the Fresno Bulldogs. We know about that, right? But his water bank was he is one of those people that I think about our entire infrastructure in the state of California, and it was great visionaries who were willing to have a vision and make the investment and take some risks, knowing that they may never personally benefit, but they had that vision for the next generation and many generations after that. And I think that just inspires you to always think about paying it forward, that it's our turn to do that with our infrastructure, to build that kind of capacity. So just great person, good life, touched many. I'm going to touch very quickly on a couple things that are going on right now. We did have, unfortunately, another find of virulent Newcastle's disease. We're on top of that. We were hopeful we would have things all declared free from by January, and now it'll probably be March, maybe May. But we're on top of it. We continue to have a great partnership with USDA on that. We did find HLB in San Bernardino County, so that expands our quarantines. But we continue to have great partnership with the industry. Homeowners have been very accommodating. We can't do these programs without that kind of cooperation. We've been working very hard on the water resiliency portfolio, which we thought might be out by now, but it isn't, and we're not certain when it will be. And I'm going to Aqua tomorrow to talk about the governor's water resiliency portfolio, so I'll just make it up.
Say whatever you like.
No, I would never do that. But we've got great collaboration. The three agencies, EPA, Resources, and CDFA, have a really great working relationship, which means we get to disagree with one another every now and then, and still work our way and tuck our way through the process and the projects. And we're also working very hard on some additional goals for our natural working landscapes. I reported, I think, last month that there was, for the Economic Summit, there was a release of the economic impact of our working landscapes, $333 billion. I think that's pretty conservative, and it did not include ecosystem services. I think it's a real opportunity for us to continue to hone in on that economic and scientific project. Nature's capital, what is it truly worth? I was at a presentation last month where Erin Fitzgerald, who spoke here, and maybe because I had to walk out on her presentation before you, she referred to our farmland and our soils as the equivalent of our rainforest. What would we do to preserve, conserve, and restore our equivalent of a rainforest? And I thought that was, I like that analogy a lot. So that's all I'm going to say today, because we now have a quorum and we can go on with our agenda. Thanks.
Thank you, Secretary. At this time, we'll move to approve the minutes from the November 5th meeting. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? So moved. Thank you. All right, at this time, we'll open it up to public comments for items that are not on the agenda. No? Yes. Welcome.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Matthew Ong with Western Growers Association. Happy December to everyone. This year has absolutely flown by. I wanted to just raise a point that I believe was covered at the November board meeting, and it was in regards to cannabis operations in the state. And there was some discussion about sort of the tension that has arisen regarding kind of produce growers and cannabis, and the concerns about sprayed drift from pesticides. I wanted to just let everyone know that remains an ongoing concern. We're hearing more and more from our membership that they're hearing from cannabis growers in their areas, especially the Central Coast, with concerns about pesticide residues. Fortunately, when we have inquired about that, we have seen very little to no residue exposure onto cannabis crops, but our folks remain very, very concerned about this issue, and so I wanted to raise it again for the board and for CDFA. The CDFA staff has been really wonderful to work with on this issue and providing additional detail to myself and to our organization, because we're not experts in the cannabis field, but we're learning more every day. I think as we all are in the state as we're kind of embarking into this new realm. So I wanted to raise that again, and we've also had good partnerships with the Department of Pesticide Regulation as well in this conversation. So I just wanted to raise that again, that it's still on our radar. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Do we have any questions? Go ahead, Don.
Have there been, is it concern on the part of the cannabis industry, or is it, have there been actual contamination of crops?
So that's a great question. So it's concern from the cannabis industry because our produce growers have been hearing from them. Given that it's still against the law at the federal level, there's no pesticide cannot be applied onto that, right, if it's not registered under FIFRA. And so there's no baseline exposure that can show up onto the cannabis crop in order for it to be manufactured and sold into California. So the cannabis operators and growers have been reaching out to our folks, and sometimes with more of letters that are pretty direct, with very direct concerns to say, do not have any pesticide exposure onto our neighboring crop. And of course, our growers do everything that they can to make sure and ensure that anything that's applied onto their crops remains on the crop and does not go across to a neighboring crop. Of course, we follow all the application procedures and the laws, but our folks are very worried within the produce industry about sort of the unintended things that can happen where exposure may occur onto a cannabis crop. And liabilities that may be associated with that. And so I think this is something that was not fully expected as we embark into, having outdoor operations, especially the Central Coast. And our folks are learning more day by day, trying to understand and to mitigate any impacts.
So, Don, if I could speak to that, Kathy Fisher was asked by her Board of Supervisors 3 months ago to convene a work group bringing together. In Santa Barbara County in particular, the cry was led by avocado, citrus, and wine grape growers. Mm-hmm. But she brought all the people together, and she told me she could not recommend that strongly enough. They did professional facilitation to just air the issues from both sides and to create a conversation because many people in the cannabis industry are very new to agriculture, and they're not from agriculture. And so just these different perspectives and different cultures coming together. She said it's not that they came up with a whole list of answers, but they created a safe place to have a dialogue without threats, because some of them have threatened, if I see you spraying, I will bring a suit because I have to protect this very valuable crop. So I do think there's a huge opportunity for our agricultural commissioners, on top of everything else that they do, of being able to be the right place to do some convenings like that and try to create some understanding from both sides as we work our way through this new crop. And with hemp going into even
Right.
more places. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're working our way through a lot of those issues, and the DPR is being supportive to the extent that we can on the cannabis side. And now that hemp is a legal crop, we'll still have some issues to work through.
Do you have the aerial applicators in the room also on this process?
Yep.
Yep, I think as we move forward, I think it's going to turn into a larger problem, and
Yeah, agreed.
as more and more people get
Yeah.
get out there. Bryce?
You know, I appreciate the issue related to cannabis, but isn't this an issue for any crop where there's not an MRL established for the crop?
Absolutely.
And so we work with that in all sorts of crops where there's not an MRL. Okay, and so the cannabis people are picking it out, but I mean, in the crops I work with, there's a very
Right.
limited groups of materials that are allowed.
Yes.
And there's not MRLs established for a lot of neighboring crops, and so I think almost all growers are subject to this, but and the state of testing. You know, if I choose to test at 0.02 and a customer's choosing to test at 0.01,
Right.
I mean, and 10 years ago, the level of testing was all sorts of higher. Aren't we all subject to this sort of thing? Are the cannabis growers just making a big deal out of this, or are their customers much more sensitive to this? But anytime I send a product to Europe and they're going to test for something, it's always an issue.
No, I think you're really honed in to the exact point. I think because new to the industry, right, and to being now with operating within this legal framework of understanding all of compliance issues. I think that's come from a misunderstanding as well about what ag is already doing, and how we actually apply product onto our crops, and we do it in a manner that's subject to label restrictions. Certain crop protection tools that we utilize are subject to permitting from the ag commissioners. And so I think, as we're learning from sort of, I would call the conventional ag side about kind of this new paradigm that we're living in, so too are folks operating in the cannabis industry understanding how ag actually operates outside of just their piece of the industry.
I would just say that the material I kind of always look for is allowable at 20 on rice. On other crops, it's not allowable that we grow, so we
Right.
watch for it. It's allowable up to 20. At organic, it's allowable at 1, and we're testing at 0.02 and 0.01, right? And so I guess it all, to me, depends on what kind of what we're expecting from agriculture as we work together in our valleys and agricultural areas.
Right.
But I will also add, when you get either a new chemical or a new commodity grown in an area, cultural practices need to tighten up. And that's also part of the issue. I'm from the rice industry, and we've been hammered for a number of years, and some of it is carelessness. And it was a mostly aerial application industry, and we've gone to ground rigs. Okay, and that tightens up a lot of drift, and so some of these commodities are going to also have to adapt to these new commodities. Unfortunately, it makes it harder. It costs more money, but it's safer, and that's what we want.
Yeah, and I'll leave with this. I understand that, and I come from a rice. Actually, I come from a rice growing family, so I understand those issues. And to the Secretary's point, the letters that have been threatening is the right word to use for those, and they've been very direct to say, do not apply anything to your field. So it gets outside of even that issue about any potential drift issues, like don't apply to your field because we don't want to have anything potentially coming onto ours. And so that's a different conversation to have. But I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And, I think we're going to be dealing with this as we move forward. I think it's going to turn into a real issue for us, so good to hear about it. we're going to move on to our first presentation this morning. This is a wildfire recovery update. Lee Dory with Cal Office of Emergency Services. Lee is the chief of the Response Operation Branch of the Governor's Office of Emergency Services. In his role, he leads the state's operational readiness and serves as a director for the State Operations Center. So welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here today. Secretary Ross, honorable members of the State Board of Food and Agriculture, and today members of the audience, privileged to be here to present to you information about wildfire recovery, but also wildfire response. It's really hand in hand that we have. And so I'll have a presentation that I believe will bring up here in a moment, and we can get started. And again, thank you for the introduction, Chairperson. Again, my name is Lee Dory. I've had the privilege to work for the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services in 2 different stints and in leadership roles in the last 11 years, formerly also with the Department of Corrections and Department of General Services. So about a 27-year state employee prior to that in the private sector. We've seen a lot happen in our industries across the world today. And we hope that all of our days, no matter what we define, I hate to use the word paradise anymore, I used to use that for this picture that I share, but we hope that we enjoy this every day. In the world of emergency management, Homeland Security, we face this. And it's not just necessarily wildfire. Cal OES and the state as a whole is an all-hazards organization, both man-made and natural disasters that occur daily. At the local level, the regional level, the state level, nationally and internationally, Cal OES and state agency partners, along with the public, other public partners, nonprofits, and private sector, all respond to these disasters. Governor Brown, right before he left, kind of threw us for a loop and talked about the new abnormal. He talked about climate change and the extreme weather changes that are happening. He talked about more severe and frequent disasters, which is absolutely true, and how disasters disproportionately affect disadvantaged populations, and it absolutely does. So welcome to California for those of you who live here all your life. We are the most disaster-prone state in the United States, and I've got proof, and it's federal proof. It's not state proof or otherwise. So since 1953, the state of California has experienced 300 major presidential declared disasters, and that includes 226 fires, but also many other disasters that we've faced historically. And so the next slide really is more important. We are coming into a slower period, knock on wood, thankfully, but as you can see, on average, those 300-plus disasters that we've had as major presidential disasters, and that's disasters that typically are 53.5 million or greater to the state of California with the impact. The more important statistic or visual that I'd like you to look at and the audience to look at is what's happened since 2002, what we're facing across the board, and how it's continuing to increase. We have a very diverse population in California, as you respectfully know, almost 40 million people across 58 counties. We also have 109 federally recognized tribal nations in California that we work closely with, along with the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs. And a very diverse geography, highest and lowest point in the contiguous United States, very diverse population, and the geography that's there. So we look back at CAL FIRE, and I take a lot of statistics from our partner agency. And this was their outlook before this season started, basically coming out of 2017 and 18, which are the most deadliest and destructive wildfires in our state history. We lost more than 100 lives. Climate change is considered a key driver, and the length of the fire season is estimated to increase at least 75 days. We really don't have a fire season anymore. It really goes year-round. I mean, we've seen fires in late December, and we've seen fires in January. Not historical by any means, but just to give you a footprint of what's happened in the last couple of years, we've seen significant increase of acres burned, especially in 17 and 18, as you can see, almost 1.5 and 1.6 million acres. We've had significant amount of incidents. We've had a significant amount of fatalities. The large number in 2018, many of that, of course, is related to the Camp Fire. And we've seen thousands and thousands of structures destroyed or damaged. And the last statistic there is the days that the State Operations Center where I have the privilege, one of my jobs is to lead. That's a place where you want it to be quiet and peaceful. You do not want it to be operational. Secretary Ross does not want to be sitting up with Mark and the team at the UCG, Unified Coordination Group, strategically working on actions that we're taking. So, and honestly, over the course of the last 4 years, we've been activated almost 300 days in the State Operations Center, which is historical by all means. Just to give you an idea, too, for size and range of the fires year to date, alone we've had over 250,000 acres burnt this year, and we're not done yet. We're hoping to be done now with the rain now finally getting here. In the last 17 years, we've seen 15 of the top 20 wildfires in our state history with different causes. We've seen the top 20 destructive wildfires, 15 of top 20. In that time period, we've also seen the deadliest. And more importantly, look at the cost, just in fire suppression alone. In the last 5 years, almost $3 billion has been spent to put fires out. And all the work that comes around that as well. So on his first day on the job, Governor Newsom sat behind our big four that I call them, certainly the TAG, Dave Baldwin, my boss, Director Gil Arducci, the CAL FIRE Chief Tom Porter, and Commissioner Warren Stanley, and signed his first 2 executive orders right upstairs in my office, above my office in our Director's Council room, pertaining to emergency management. So while we saw Governor Brown focus his first few years on the budget, Governor Newsom has come right in from the day one, and it's not slowed down since, to be honest. I have some pictures as we go along here as well. This is one of the most recent fires. This is Kincaid, and response to Kincaid. This is another picture from CAL FIRE on the mountaintop up above Sonoma County. This is down at the Getty fire. Again, this was a concurrent fire that we were facing in Southern California. This area burnt a few years ago as well, right along the Highway 405 corridor. So it's not just rural fires that we're seeing, it's urban. And you're hearing the word now, urban interface. You're seeing communities faced with a significant amount of threat now, not just public safety power shutoff, but all sorts of other threats, including wildfire that could come into their suburban or even urban environment. One of our larger jets that drop retardant. In 2018, in July, we saw Shasta Strong following, again, an urban interface fire that burned right up to the edge of the western side of Redding, California. Significant amount of damage and destruction there. We had multiple fires at that time burning. That was known as the Carr Fire. We also had the Mendocino Complex, which was just about 500,000 acres, and the Ferguson Fire burning in Yosemite. I don't know if you recall, but a lot of people were wearing masks at that time. The air quality was some of the worst in state history that we faced. And the Camp Fire, day 1 was not as bad as day 2. Day 2, this fire exploded north, south, east, and west. It went in all 4 directions. Very difficult to manage. CAL FIRE and U.S. Forest Service and many other responding agencies did as great a job as possible, but that fire was moving so quickly across the mountaintop, and that's why we saw the mass destruction that we did. This same area was threatened by fire in 2008, but thankfully they stopped the fire just prior to getting into the Paradise area. But unfortunately, 10 years later, that was not the case. Again, when the Camp Fire started, you see the significant amount of smoke that impacts workers. We had a significant amount, for instance, of farm workers that were impacted by this. And anyone working outdoors, construction or otherwise, needed to take additional precautionary measures. Working with Cal OSHA and Secretary Ross and her team and many others within the State Department of Public Health, these are all actions that we had to take. Know that we use every resource possible, including National Guard air assets, both jets as well as other assets to track fires, especially nighttime. This is actually in 2015 over the Rim Fire, over Yosemite again. Yosemite, that whole area tends to burn a lot. Oop, got that in there twice. So for any Ron Burgundy fans, I kind of am a Ron Burgundy fan. I asked the question, this is something I need you to think about and your constituency. Why don't they prepare? There are many reasons why people are not prepared, and many think that government is going to save them. And certainly government is going to do everything in their power, but it is an all community approach to preparing for and responding to and recovering from disasters. So first and foremost, the question would be, are you ready? Is the audience ready? Do you have the things that you need? And I would challenge each of you to say, one of the issues is it costs too much. I would tell you that with less than $50, you could be prepared to some degree for you to be able to survive, whatever it may be, whether it's cyber or otherwise. Everything that we do in the world of emergency management, homeland security in the state of California is designed and supported by the legislative yellow book. The Emergency Services Act, our incident command system, our multi-agency coordination, our mutual aid, our operational area concept. What that means basically is that for whatever reason they didn't call it a county, we define counties as an operational area. So if you hear OA or operational area, that's a county. And then all the emergency compacts that exist, we have a significant amount of compacts in California, not just next door, let's say with Arizona or Nevada or Oregon or Washington or Hawaii. We actually have emergency management compacts throughout the nation, and we have agreements actually in place in many countries throughout the world. In a big look at things for emergency management real fast, the ICS structure stood up in 1970, followed by the standardized emergency system that stood up following the Oakland Hills fire in 1991, where we lost 3,000 homes. And then following 9/11, the National Incident Management System was created by the federal government, and a lot of it modeled California. So California has been a leading driver in emergency management, homeland security over time. But this is the structure of emergency management today, and this is important for each of you to know in your local communities. Everything that happens is a field level response. The state or federal government are not going to tell local responders how to manage their incidents. We're there to support them directly. So if a field commander or an incident commander needs assistance, they raise their hand and they go to their local government partner. They would then step up to their operational area, their county. They would come up to one of our 3 regions. I have the privilege right now to lead the coastal region, which encompasses 16 counties from Del Norte down to Monterey. I have a counterpart here in Sacramento that covers 31 counties, from Siskiyou County down to Kern, and another counterpart in Southern California at Los Alamitos Joint Forces Command Base that covers 11 counties. So we have on-the-ground personnel in emergency management, law enforcement, fire, telecommunications, and many other things. If the regions need assistance, that's when the State Operations Center down the road at Mather stands up and we begin operating. And then when federal government is requested by the governor, that's when the state is overwhelmed or needs assistance, and by all means, that's been the recent case many times over. We work by a significant amount of emergency plans at the local, state, and federal level. You can go to bed every night and read for the rest of your life, and you won't read all the emergency management plans. The state of California also has a brand new alert and warning guideline exists. It is called a guideline. We're not, again, telling operational areas or counties how to alert and warn. That's up to the county and the specific sheriff of that county. A sheriff of a county is their lead law enforcement of that county. But it gives guidelines to first responders and to emergency managers and officials on how to identify the threats that are in front of them, how to alert and warn their populations, and how to basically share that situational awareness. It's a significant, and we're the first and only state to have this. And we've learned, unfortunately, through lessons such as the Camp Fire and others, how important alert and warning is with the diverse population that we have. Some certainly highly ability to communicate effectively with their smartphones, and others that don't have a smartphone, don't have a computer. And many communities have taken away the sirens and other notification sources. So this is the structure of the OA concept and the mutual aid regions that exist, just so you know in your respective communities of how this works. Again, I define the coastal, inland, and southern regions, and those are also broken up into 6 mutual aid regions. This has been in existence for a significant amount of time, and the intent here is it's neighbor helping neighbor. That's what the world of emergency management is all about. Again, for me, I have the privilege to lead coastal from Del Norte down to Monterey. And then this is the State Operations Center. I would invite each and every one of you. Secretary Ross has probably spent way too much time there, and we sincerely appreciate that. She's been a strong advocate and supporter, and her team has been outstanding to work with. Asha and Tracy, and I can go back, many years. But this is the State Operations Center at Mather, just down the road. I would love to host you there if you want to come by for a tour. We also have emergency support functions. I wanted to bring this to your attention. One of this was initially started in 2008 by Governor Schwarzenegger, who signed the state emergency plan in place. And what they found was that we had about 10 to 15 top state agencies and departments that always responded. What the new state emergency plan back in 2008 did was really put all 225 boards, commissions, state departments, state agency partners, all in line to assist. And they aligned them up with state agencies such as ESF 11, which is food and agriculture. So Secretary Ross, in her role, leads Emergency Support Function 11 and sits with us and coordinates with her team and ensures that as the subject matter experts and represents each of your interests and that of food and agriculture throughout the state of California and beyond. Just so you do know, also in the response and recovery, they align together. The day we respond is the day we start recovery. And it starts from the initial situational awareness. We're looking at threats now many, many days ahead of time. Certainly we're in a no-notice state. I mean, we don't know when that next earthquake is going to happen. As we saw on July 4th and July 5th down in the Central Valley, the lower Central Valley. But just know that there's a full structure in place of how we respond and how we recover and helping those communities. It starts locally and always ends locally. The state, federal government are always there just to support. Local government, again, we're not going to tell them how to do their business. And there's a continuum that exists. The preparedness factor, the short term, intermediate, and long term. And we see these communities, unfortunately, sometimes it takes years and years. The major earthquake that our scientists are predicting, in our lifetime, we will not be fully recovered. I can give you an idea, just as an example. The Northridge earthquake happened in 1994. In 2016, we closed out the final paperwork for the Northridge earthquake. So it took 22 years for that, I'll call it a medium-sized earthquake. That was not construed as catastrophic, no disrespect to that community, but that's not what we're seeing with regard to what the scientists at USGS and CGS and others are predicting for us. So it's going to take a long, long time for recovery. And there is a framework for recovery as well that's out there, just so you know. And it focuses too on housing, infrastructure, health and social services, economic recovery, natural and cultural resources, community planning, and capacity building. Those are all the things that we work with regard to individual assistance, public assistance, and helping communities recover and basically get better and stronger at what they do. So we have the campfire. We've all seen the images. If I had more time, I'd actually play you a video, but if you get a chance, just type into the computer campfire and Ed Sheeran, and there's about a 5-minute video that was produced that if you don't have a tear in your eye after that's done, I don't know. I'm a little worried about these two young people sitting on top of this car watching this wildfire. I work diligently in trying to find the most current and actionable pictures because I think photos share so much more of what life is about and what we do. I'm not sure why this person in the Thomas Fire is walking through this, but just know too, from wildfires, we also have the impacts that come along with it. So this is again down in beautiful Santa Barbara, California. I spent 2 weeks down just after the Thomas Fire and really after the Montecito mud flow incident, assisting the county of Santa Barbara with their emergency management. So that's what that hillside looked like following the Thomas Fire. Montecito experienced 20% of the mud flow landslide off of that mountaintop. So there's still 80% up on top of that mountain. This is a positive yet sad story. The young lady they saved, this is a familiar slide or familiar story. Unfortunately, her father and brother did not survive this incident. We lost 21 fatalities and 2 are still unrecovered, a baby as well as a 17-year-old Jack from this incident. And it looked bad. So think about not just the impacts of wildfire, but all the cascading impacts. We see public safety power shut off. No matter what you feel about it, there has been impacts to that. And concurrently, we saw it certainly with the Kincaid Fire. I also had the privilege to spend 2 weeks up in Sonoma County assisting them just after the Kincaid Fire started. That's the mountaintop on the top and the mud flow that comes down. And honestly, the pictures look just like this. I'd never seen, I've gone to a lot of destructive incidents, and it's sad. Highway 101, not what you want to see. That's a lifeline route for California, gone. And that, again, it came through that community from the bottom right of your screen all the way out to the ocean. We found well, certainly we found a bear on the beach, if you recall that. We found a Volkswagen Bug on the beach, and many other things also out there. And of course, not what you want to find in your house of worship or Highway 101. So not only think about the wildfire impacts, but others. So getting specifically to each of you and your responsibility and the role of animals. We learned a lot from the campfire. We've learned a lot from every fire and or every disaster. Certainly we deal with wild animals, I should say. We're dealing with pets, which, as you all know, that's an extension of individuals. They do not want to go anywhere without their pets. That's why so few people go to shelters. 5% to 10% on average go to shelters. Most shelters today are trying to cure allowing people to bring their pets to the shelter, but unfortunately today most have to separate the person from their animals, and that's difficult for some. We have a relationship with Australia. One of the things, I mean, they've experienced significant drought, which we also, like Secretary Ross and the team here, worked diligently on for many, many years, 5 years plus. But we're learning from them about not only drought, but the significant wildfires, just as they're facing today. But we had a presentation, and this gentleman that had this, I asked him for this picture because here's a wild animal. Just looking at his eye into that firefighter's eye, that tells you something. Recently, we also had the Woolsey fire as the campfire was rolling. So beautiful Malibu, California, along this coastline. And do you want to know what residents did to save their animals? Here's one example. So they tied them up to lifeguard stands on the beach. So citizens, homeowners, owners of animals find every way possible to work with groups, to work with individually, to find a safe place, not only for themselves, but their animals. With the campfire, we found, unfortunately, many people left, and they left their animals there. We had thousands and thousands of animals that we had to deal with, and we had organizations trying to assist, but it was challenging by all means. I mean, we were feeding over 10,000 animals, from koi fish to large livestock. And thank goodness for, again, Secretary Ross, the National Guard, and many other groups that helped do that for a significant period of time. So I always tell people to think about this little guy. Would you leave him behind in a disaster? This is Teddy. This is my little terror. He's 10 pounds. I think he thinks he's 150. But your animals and everything that goes along with that are a key part of that. So we've had some lessons learned and best practices. We've integrated our training more and more. We're doing a lot more with threat assessment. Again, there's significant threats and cascading impacts. Consequence management is what we call it. The governor and CAL FIRE and ourselves are pre-positioning a significant amount of equipment and resources into communities. We're building a deeper response bench, and we're rehabilitating resources. Instead of just recycling or giving them away, we're rehabilitating because, as you all know, funds are tight in this industry. We always talk about the importance of training and exercise, and I would encourage each of you to ensure that that's the case. I mean, certainly, I will just say this. We don't get on a plane and turn left when we walk in the door and we talk to that pilot and ask, excuse me, ma'am, sir, how many hours of flying time do you have? You know, a lot of times we don't even ask our doctor before surgery about their experience, right? I will tell you, citizens today believe that government officials, government employees are prepared, are trained, are exercised, and are ready to go to assist fully. And I will tell you that they are to many degrees, but I mean, we have almost 250,000 state employees, for instance. We have a lot to go with regard to that, but always train and exercise. It's a whole community approach, as I shared with you, as we take a look at the future of emergency management, homeland security in our country, and our state, and our world. This is a last shot for campfire. My question now, of course, is, are you ready for the zombie apocalypse? Especially those of you that like horror films. So you have a choice. Which button are you going to push? Are you going to push the survival button? Are you going to push the panic button? Are you going to push the easy button? That's up to you, and that's up to those that you represent every day. You can only push one. There's simple things that you can do to be prepared every day. And the simple things that, if you recall, Mom and Dad always said, keep your gas tank half full. Carry some cash on you. If you don't have power, You can always go out into your car and turn on your radio to get, if you don't have a crank radio, for instance. There's just simple things that you can do, have a go kit in place. So not only are you ready, but is your organization ready? Do you have a continuity plan? Do you know where the fire extinguishers are? Do you know your exodus plan, your evacuation plan? Do you know what you're going to do to protect your employees that work for you? So that's been a key issue for us. So I know we're here to talk about wildfires, but I also have to always talk about earthquakes, especially since we faced this large disaster. If that earthquake, if the Ridgecrest earthquake had happened a little north and west or a little south and west, we'd have a different result today than we've had. Thankfully, those communities and they've had over 17,000 aftershocks in that community, varying sizes. But this is the scary part to me. If you look at the earthquake faults, and they actually just found 21 new sub-faults in Southern California. So, and you look at a recent shot of California and the population, the 40 million people that live here. Where do the majority of people live? Right on top of earthquake faults. So it's going to be a significant disaster when we face it. So to each of you, I would challenge you to say, you're not the ones driving out, you're the ones driving in. You're the responders too. You all have a role and responsibility on this board and in your daily lives to ensure that the support is there to help and assist and to help those citizens that need, especially those with access and functional needs, seniors, children, and many others that are greatly impacted by these disasters. So for this, I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have. And I would again welcome you up at Mather at any time. You each have my business card. It would be a privilege and honor to host you there. I know our leadership would love to have you there. Secretary Ross, we'd love to have you back on what we call a blue sky day.
Not in the middle of the disaster.
No, sir. So thank you for your time.
I just want to thank you. That was a great presentation and the work that you do. It's amazing when we think about all the things that happen, I call it behind the curtains, that we don't have to worry about, and the professionalism of OES at every level is the most amazing thing, and the dedication that it takes. It's a real asset for California, each one of you are, and you've been great to work with. We did learn a lot of lessons, especially for people who, Mark said every town hall meeting he went to, the first question would be about how do I get my animals back? And the response is different from county to county, who's in charge and that coordination. And so fortunately, the governor has made an investment in this department for us to have a stronger unit to be able to help coordinate all of that. And I also have to give kudos to the UC Davis Vet School and those students and the real life experiences they get and the innovation that they're learning about, like tilapia fish skin to help bears recover after fires on their paws. It's amazing.
So thank you for your time. If there are any questions, I can take those, but I'm respectful of your time.
Joy, why don't you go ahead and start us off? Thank you very much, Lee.
Thank
Great
you.
presentation.
Thank you for a tremendous presentation. I was struck the first two slides. Slide number 1 was paradise, and sadly, in many respects, slide number 2 was also paradise, the town of Paradise. You mentioned preparedness, and I commend Cal OES for funding a study that CSU Chico is doing to survey our fairgrounds for broadband capacity. Yes. That study, I'm sorry, my middle name is Broadband. So that study, unfortunately, is a little behind schedule. But clearly, that is just so incredibly important because the fairgrounds have been pressed into service as evacuation centers, and it particularly is pertinent for the animals, especially large animals. One of the problems that Cal State Chico is having, that the people doing the study, is that some of the telecommunications companies, even though there are signed non-disclosure agreements, are not coming forward with the information that's requested, which would give us an idea of what is and isn't, which is extremely important for planning purposes. I am wondering if you could give some guidance on how we can push them?
So that's a great question, and it's been an ongoing issue. We saw it also in the Kincaid fire when we actually had over 600 cell towers that were down due to public safety power shutoff and the wildfire that was existing throughout our region, just in the coastal region. You're absolutely right. The telecommunications providers with the SEC have, even though you have NDAs in place, they feel that they have certain rights and responsibilities to protect individuals and companies' private information. And that includes where, for instance, their towers are. For instance, today, unless you knew exactly what was on that tower, many providers have, multiple wireless providers are on a single tower. But you wouldn't know who's on which tower. They don't share that data amongst themselves. They keep it pretty close hand. And so it's been an ongoing issue. I will say, a few weeks ago, the governor signed into law some additional legislation that's going to be very helpful. And there's been public hearings that have been happening because of public safety shutoff with CPUC that are helping us, to your words, push telecommunications providers to share more information and to utilize that. And you're absolutely right. The fairground sites, Cal Expo, and all local agricultural, county-owned, are tremendous assets to Cal OES, to the state of California, not just to shelter animals, but to shelter people, to act as base camps, and many other things that they have the capability to do. But I would look forward. You have my business card. We have, as part of Cal OES, the Office of Public Safety Communications, and I would welcome the opportunity to put you in contact with Budge Courier and team, and let's see what we can do to move this forward. One thing about me, I'm very action-oriented. I don't like to talk about things very long. That's my private sector career. So a lot of people are depending upon communications today, not just at alert warning, but throughout the entire incident. The better we're prepared. However, as you all know, the fairground sites all come, virtually every one of them, I believe, is underfunded. That's just Lee Dory personal, and that's just, not Cal OES speaking. They're wonderful sites, but the fairground managers I've had the privilege to meet, each of them have a lot of challenges in how they operate, especially during a fair season, and we're trying to utilize their site during a fair, which is near impossible. But please, that's something we're not going to solve here, but would welcome the conversation to continue. And I'm thankful for that study. I'm familiar with the study, and I'm thankful for CSU Chico doing that. They've done actually several great things for the state and Cal OES specifically. Good partnership.
Thanks. Yeah. So I just want to, in case people didn't see it last week, the Farm Bureau raised money and made a contribution of almost 300 panels that can go from fair to fair. They just did a ribbon cutting of that last week, and it's already been used several times this year. We just got away around to celebrating it last week, and that was really a great partnership.
Yeah. So thank you very much.
So Lee, thank you. Really appreciate
time.
your presentation. And I know we have other questions here that maybe we can catch up with you later.
You have my card, and I would challenge you to come on out and visit us at Mather. We're only about 15 minutes up the road. Take good care, and happy holidays, everyone.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. At this time, we're going to move forward with the CDFA legislative update. We have CDFA Deputy Secretary Rachel O'Brien with us today. Good to see you, Rachel.
Good to see you.
Congratulations.
Yes, thank you so much. It was a really lovely fall recess for me. So I really can't express that enough. It was a nice time to get away, and we did go and travel, and take a honeymoon. So thank you, Secretary Ross. Well, good morning, Secretary and members of the board. For those that I don't know, I'm Rachel O'Brien. I'm the Deputy Secretary of Legislative Affairs. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. I have prepared a presentation just to highlight some of the key legislative activities from the 2019 legislative year, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some questions. I do want to caveat that the bills in this presentation are obviously, they don't cover everything. There are thousands of bills that get introduced during a legislative year, and CDFA was tracking 293 bills this year. We analyzed, so we actually did a full-blown analysis that gets sent to the governor's office, to the secretary. We did about 90 of those. On individual bills, obviously those go through various stages of the legislative process getting amended. So as you can imagine, they do build up, and our team that we have in each of the in each of the divisions do incredible work of helping us get the technical knowledge into those bill analyses of how those bills will impact the department and agriculture at large. So huge thank you to CDFA staff for that. With that, yes, got it. So first off, I just wanted to highlight a couple of bills that were of kind of statewide significance. Starting out with AB 74, which was a bill by Assemblymember Ting. He's chair of the Assembly Budget Committee. This was the main budget act of 2019 that the governor formally adopted. It was a $214.8 billion budget that was passed on June 27th of this year. The budget put significant resources into catastrophic livestock disease prevention and emergency response, pest management solutions, climate-smart agricultural grants, the California Biodiversity Initiative, the Citrus Pest and Disease Prevention Program, and the administration of the Industrial Hemp Program. These were just a few of the highlights in the agricultural space. Following its adoption, a series of trailer bills were approved, including a cannabis trailer bill. This was AB 97. I highlight this one because it did have key provisions in it relating to licensure, local equity grants, and penalties against unlicensed cannabis activity. The next was SB 1. This was carried by the Senate Pro Tem Atkins, and it would have enacted the California Environmental, Public Health, and Worker Defense Act of 2019 with the intent of ensuring that protections afforded under federal environmental and labor laws and regulations as of January 2017 could remain in place in the event that there were any changes made on the federal side. This bill was, as some of you may know, pretty contentious with stakeholders around the state. It had been in place in a previous legislative vehicle the year before, and so had kind of been brewing. Ultimately, this did pass the legislature on the last night of session around 1 a.m. and was subsequently vetoed by the governor. The next highlight was SB 200. This was a bill by Senator Monning. Many of us had been involved in this legislation and its various iterations over the years. This bill established the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund. Its purpose is to help provide water systems an adequate and affordable supply of safe drinking water in both the short and long term. And then beginning in fiscal year 2020 through 2021, and until June 30th, 2030, it annually transfers 5% of the proceeds from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund up to the cap of $130 million. This bill also requires the Water Resources Control Board to develop a fund expenditure plan. And as many of you know, this legislation, this issue, was long championed by the Secretary, yourselves, the agricultural community, in partnership with our sister agencies, as well as the environmental justice advocacy community. I would say, truthfully, this was a Herculean effort by all, and a really great step forward in improving the drinking water of some of the most disadvantaged communities in our state. Next up, we've got several agricultural bills that I've pulled out, this slide and the next. The first was AB 417. This was a bill by Assemblymember Arambula that would have established the Agricultural and Rural Prosperity Act. It would have authorized the Secretary to consult with stakeholders, our sister agencies, to identify areas to further rural agricultural communities. The bill also requires CDFA to create a position within the department's executive office to assist in this effort. This bill was vetoed by the governor, who expressed his agreement with the overall intent of the bill, the vision of the bill, but who wished to see the establishment of the position and the responsibilities done within the budget. Next up, you have AB 488. This was by Assemblymember Aguilar Curry. This bill modified the membership of the California Broadband Council by adding the Secretary of the Department of Food and Agriculture, the State Librarian, and the Governor's Tribal Advisor to become members of this council. This is really exciting. I know one of our board members around the table, especially. Next was AB 590. This was a bill by Assemblymember Arambula. With the passage of the California Federal Milk Marketing Order, various changes to current state law were needed. So this bill was brought forth to update how milk producers pay for the Milk Producers Security Trust Fund, conforms various terms in the Federal Milk Marketing Order with state law, revises the assessments that fund the Secretary's supervisorial duties related to milk and dairy food safety. It revises the Dairy Council of California's assessment collection structure, and it clarifies the purposes and activities of that council. Next, we had AB 658. This is a bill by also Assemblymember Arambula. According to the author, the best way to minimize damage during periods of drought is to prepare and capture water in times of high flows. Drought, combined with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, are going to vastly change the landscape of our farming and urban communities if we do not adequately prepare. And so he brought forward this bill, which does authorize a groundwater sustainability agency or a local agency to apply for, and the State Water Resources Control Board to issue a conditional temporary permit for diversion of surface water to groundwater storage for beneficial use that advances the sustainability goals. Next, I wanted to highlight SB 153 by Senator Wilk. This is around industrial hemp. I know you guys will be getting a briefing later on today by the program, and I just want to give a shout out to Josh and Michelle over there. They have done fantastic work, and they've been really great partners of mine as we've worked through this bill and a bill previously that really help get at bringing California further in alignment with the federal Farm Bill. As many of you know, at the end of 2018, the federal Farm Bill legalized hemp nationally, and therefore SB 153 was introduced to make technical amendments to the Food and Ag Code regarding the cultivation of hemp. This included various definitions, board membership, registration requirements, reporting, cultivation requirements, sampling, and testing methods. This bill also set a deadline for CDFA to submit a state regulatory plan to the U.S. State Department of Agriculture for approval before May 1st of 2020. A lot of this process has been this, kind of back and forth of chicken, egg, or who crossed the road first, with the feds taking action, the state taking action, and never quite in alignment. So part of the legislation of SB 1409 last year was to bring us a little closer in alignment. We knew the federal Farm Bill was working on this issue. Once it passed, SB 153 was brought forward again by the legislature, and we worked collaboratively with them to get there. We may still need to see work as you may know, USDA is still working on their final guidelines, but this was a great effort. Next was SB 153, a bill by Senator McGuire. This bill further informs CDFA's Appellations program, which is housed under our Cal Cannabis Cultivation Licensing Division. This bill expanded on what were called existing truth in marketing requirements related to cannabis grown in specific counties to include a prohibition against misrepresentation of the kind of cannabis produced going forward. Last up, I have SB 449, also by Senator McGuire. This bill allowed the continuance of the department's Pierce's Disease Control Program, the Pierce's Disease Glass C Wing Sharpshooter Board, and the Pierce's Disease Management Account until March 1st, 2026. As you know, this bill is vitally important to the wine grape growing industry as they combat that pest. Lastly, this bill also made a modification to the appointment of the statewide coordinator from a governor-appointed position to a secretarial-appointed position. I just wanted to highlight real quick my annual clearing of the desk. Those were some of the bills that actually action was taken on at the first year of a 2-year session. And a quote up here by our governor, Governor Gavin Newsom. Together, we have accomplished a great deal this year to help California families get ahead and made historic progress on some of the state's most intractable challenges. It was a very busy year, the first year of this administration, and very exciting. Looking ahead, we can expect to see a lot more legislative efforts around catastrophic wildfires, as we just heard from Cal OES, the public safety power shutoffs, as well as housing and homelessness. But we could also expect to see legislative activity and interest around resource and resiliency bonds. In 2019, there were 2 pieces of legislation moving, AB 352 by Assemblymember Garcia and SB 45 by Senator Allen. These 2 bills have slight variations in the policy that are in them and slightly different price tags. As you can see, I did put them up there for you. But both would have enacted the Wildfire Prevention, Safe Drinking Water, Drought Preparation, and Flood Protection Bond Act of 2020, which, if passed and approved by the voters, authorizes the issuance of bonds to finance programs that will help the state mitigate and adapt to issues around fire preparation and flood protection. These 2 bills included agricultural programs that would be implemented by the department that focused on water efficiency as well as soil health and soil carbon sequestration. Just a note that Senator Allen's bill also included funding for what are being called emergency centers, and these would include our state fairground sites. These would be used to safeguard vulnerable populations from extreme weather and public health events. Next, I wanted to highlight a pair of packaging legislation, AB 1080 by Assemblymember Lorena Gonzalez and SB 54 by Senator Allen. These bills would have enacted the California Circular Economy and Pollution Reduction Act and require the Department of Resources Recycling and Recovery, better known to us as Cal Recycle, to develop criteria to determine which type of single-use packaging or priority single-use packaging products are reusable, recyclable, or compostable, and then for Cal Recycle to adopt regulations to source reduce with the goal of 75% of single-use plastic packaging and products by 2030. These bills would have required the producers of single-use packaging or products sold or distributed in the state to demonstrate recycling rates of not less than 20% on or after January 1, 2020, and not less than 40% on or after January 2026. These bills were the subject of what I would characterize as fierce last-minute negotiations with various shifting positions from stakeholders as changes were made to these pieces of legislation. The department did become very involved with these bills at the end of session due to the impact on the agricultural industry. These bills, along with the bills under the bond grouping, both are what are called 2-year bills. So they did not pass this legislative year, but will move into 2020. I also wanted to highlight the California Food for California Kids. This is a really, really exciting area that I think, I've been here now with you guys for 2 years, and I've seen a lot of legislative interest and activity from stakeholders in this space. And there's 2 bills that I just kind of pulled out to highlight. One was AB 958 by Assemblymember Aguilar-Curry, which would have established the California Organic to School pilot program, and SB 449, the School Meals California Grown for Healthy Kids program. And both bills, had various attributes to them, but what has not gone away when these bills didn't pass this year and did become 2-year bills is the fact that the interest in this area is probably stronger than it's ever been. You have stakeholders like Kat Taylor with the Next Gen Policy Center in particular, who has hosted several what I would call policy gatherings to discuss incentivizing school meals that would have wide-reaching benefits not only to student health, educational success, California farmers, food service workers, the chefs that serve our kids, as well as teachers. And I think that we'll see more to come in 2020. So with that, I wanted to be brief to allow some time for questions, but here's our legislative team up in the executive office, myself, Beverly Garland, and Taya Lee, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Joy, go ahead.
Congratulations again. And I'm sure everybody joins me in wishing you just all the happiness in the world. And thank you for a great presentation. That is a phenomenal number of bills to track. Mind-boggling, absolutely mind-boggling. So forgive me for picking one. Yeah, you can guess. So AB 417, the Arambula bill. It was all about rural prosperity, and it would have given a new position for you, Secretary Ross, and most importantly, money. And since the governor has decided, oh, and by the by, the bill actually explicitly said 3 times it used the word broadband. So, moi. But his veto message, as you pointed out, said that he would prefer to see this activity taken care of through the budget. So how do we influence that? Is that another bill that needs to get somebody to author, or thank you.
So we work through a budget process that starts as soon as one budget is signed, we start building a budget for the following year. And so we're working through that process.
Yeah, I have to say the people in our budget office, as well as the Department of Finance, they do not stop. It's year-round. It's pretty incredible. But thank you, Joyce.
Thanks for a terrific presentation. And just going back to the now 2-year bills around California food for California kids, what's necessary and what needs to happen for those to move forward in a positive direction, and what are the contentious issues?
Yeah, I think all of those bills have a common thread, which is money. And they, of course, will, I think, get wrapped up in budget conversations going forward into 2020. Specifically to the California Food for California Kids, I always think it's important to have that legislative activity moving through the process to continue to keep the pressure on. These groups feel really passionately about this issue, and so I think that they have strong authors. I think that they have other members in the legislature who also care about this issue. We've seen a lot of activity around, especially from Assemblymember Ting, who comes out of San Francisco but is really concerned about food deserts and food access. So they definitely have a champion there. But I think that continued conversations with each other. Sometimes it comes down to competing priorities. Some groups back one bill, other groups back another bill, and that becomes an issue. So I think what Kat Taylor is doing of bringing these groups together over the interim is really, really healthy, because it's allowing them to kind of flesh out those issues and figure out what they want to prioritize collectively in 2020.
If I could stress what Kat envisions is that we focus on getting nutritious food to every child, and that lots of these are taking a little piece of that. And what school nutrition directors need is as much flexibility as possible, and that if we can build out the pie to get just a few more cents or dimes into their budgets, then we can start to add, if we want, some additional funding for organic, whatever it is. She's trying to get everybody to focus on job number 1 is that every child gets better nutrition, and we hear every day about the real need for that. And so she's really put together an unusual coalition, including not just school nutrition directors, but those employees, because this is also skills development, and that what what teachers and school nutrition directors want is a comprehensive program, including a chance to do school garden and that experiential learning, as well as breakfast, lunch, after-school snacks, whatever it might be. So her intent, and I support her wholeheartedly in this, is let's focus first on nutritious food for every child, and let's unify around that, and then we can get add-ons over time.
I will add, we also saw over the fall, the secretary and the first partner go out and go to some of these locations, these schools who have programs that are working in this space. So I think that she'll continue to be a great partner of ours.
Thank you for a great presentation. And I just wanted to review, how many meals are we serving in the schools in a year?
1 billion. Yeah.
That could be a tremendous market for California grown. Yeah. Well, it is. We should just capitalize on it better.
Thank you for the excellent presentation. You talked about engaging in the packaging legislation, and I'm curious how the department works through processes on issues like this, where ag may be more unified as opposed to some other issue like the fuel tax that was passed a couple of years ago, or water. So what is your process in terms of engagement, and is it more through the governor's office, or are you a resource for legislators saying pros and cons and?
All of the above.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
okay.
And we also do, Rachel has great working relationships with a whole variety of stakeholders, and we do lots of one-on-ones to understand, or people will seek us out early before it might even be on our radar screen because of the conversations they're having. So it's all of the above.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will share that, going forward, this issue is a priority for the governor. He would like to see this get accomplished in the next year. And so the secretary, along with myself, are committed to continue to hear from the agricultural stakeholders, pass their concerns along to the folks working on the legislation, and continue that dialogue.
Congratulations, Rachel, and thank you for your presentation. Specifically, thank you for your work on safe drinking water and seeing that through. Congratulations. And looking forward to this year and a water bond. And you've referenced a bond here. Is that considered part of the water bond that's being discussed to support Governor Newsom's water resiliency portfolio, or are there different bonds that are being considered?
I think that could be part of it. I mean, if the governor, when he comes out with sorry, not. I think a lot of legislators will be looking at that, looking to see if they wanted to incorporate elements of that in these bond packages. I think it's a little, early to say, but, whenever we have reports like this that come out, they're incredibly valuable to the legislature in helping set priorities going forward. So I think they'll be looking at it very closely, and they could incorporate it into these particular vehicles. They could also spring off, entirely new vehicles as well.
I also want to just thank you for your work and Secretary Ross's work and Governor Newsom's position on SB1. What a challenging and difficult issue. Thank you for creating space for our NGO community and the state water team of the directors and secretary and staff, and then for water, for farms, landowners, city and county water leaders to find a place to be successful with voluntary agreements, if I might even call them the comprehensive agreements, that they could be successful. And then finally, I would just ask you to if you keep us updated on the property tax issues as they come up this year. Many people have their eye on that, and certainly there'll be a significant impact on agriculture, depending on how those property tax issues come up.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course.
All right, Rachel, thanks again. Great report, and look forward to seeing you at our coming meetings.
Thank you so much.
I guess you can all see that our legislative agenda is in very good hands.
I think so.
Thank you. Thank you very much. See you guys at lunch.
All right, we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about the alternative to the chlorpyrifos work group. Joseph McIntyre with Ag Innovations. Joseph is a senior fellow and principal facilitator at Ag Innovations. He is a nationally recognized collaboration specialist, systems thinker, and facilitator who works with the groups to unleash the potential for creative and effective action. Joseph has worked with food businesses, government agencies, nonprofit organizations, farmers, and community members to build robust solutions to some of our food system's most pressing challenges. Joseph and Ag Innovations team were one of the board's principal partners in working on the California Ag Vision. So welcome, good to see you.
It's great to be back. Thank you so much, Mr. President, and members of the board, and Secretary Ross, and friends and esteemed guests in the gallery. It's great to be here again. It's been my privilege to come over a number of years. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about a project that we're doing in conjunction with the Department of Pesticide Regulation, the California Environmental Protection Agency, and CDFA, which is to answer the question, with the cancellation of a widely used active ingredient, chlorpyrifos, what do farmers, communities, and others do? As you know, from the history of this, just as I'm going to pull out my things so I get my dates right, that all sales of chlorpyrifos will end in California on February 6th, 2020. Chlorpyrifos will continue to be allowed to be used in California under the current permit restrictions, which are very strict, through the end of this growing season, through the end of this calendar year. However, by the end of the calendar year, it will be illegal to actually be in possession of chlorpyrifos. So unlike previous changes in our pesticide regimes where excess stocks were allowed to be retained by growers and used over a period of time, this is a very different case. The Department of Pesticide Regulation is working with registrants on a buyback and return program. There are a number of companies that sell this particular active ingredient in California, and those programs will vary according to the companies, the details of which I do not yet have. But I did want to give you a sense of what the work group is about, how it's constituted, what we're trying to do, and give you a little hint about some of the things that are coming up. So first of all, what were the project goals that we were working on? And the bottom line is these three things were the things that were most important to the groups that invited us in to facilitate. So identifying safer and more sustainable pest management tools, practices, and alternatives. And I want to be clear that it's natural when we remove an active ingredient from the toolkit of pest control advisors, farmers, and others, that the first thing is, what's the next tool that I still have in the kit? And naturally, that sort of substitution process is going to be the first step that will happen here. But the Department of Pesticide Regulation, Cal EPA, and CDFA are all interested in looking at a broader suite of alternatives. There is the fact that the cancellation of chlorpyrifos happens in a broader environment, a shifting environment within California, a shifting environment about attitudes about risk, about who can expose what to who, what risk to whom, how we measure it and understand it, coming from people with very different perspectives on what constitutes an acceptable risk. So one of the next questions was examine how insecticides could strategically be used in context of expected increasing restrictions. So in some ways, this is an opening stanza to, or it's hardly an opening stanza, but a continuing stanza in a long-running play about what is the role of pesticides in California and in California agriculture. What's our mission? Very simple. If it was simple to do, I suppose they would need somebody like me, but it's simple to write down. It's certainly to develop a short-term set of recommendations and a 5-year action plan to respond to the cancellation of chlorpyrifos. Now here I'm gonna show you my cards a little bit because we're on the same team and we're not gambling here. The reality is that the short-term alternatives are those things that we have already. They're the things that we're in the toolkit that can easily be substituted. It's not like there's a brand new AI that's waiting in the wings that will all of a sudden appear on February 6th, February 2nd, and replace what we were using chlorpyrifos for. Really the action, if you would, is going to be in the longer term work, the research, the field trials, the basic research, the funding of the infrastructure for more robust integrated pest management that will be triggered as a result of these changes. Let's talk about who's sitting on the board on this group. I can confidently tell you this was the most negotiated group of stakeholders that I have ever been part of. And it's been my pleasure to be part of many stakeholder groups. And so there was a robust and ongoing dialogue between the Department of Food and Agriculture, the Department of Pesticide Regulation, and Cal EPA on how to set up the right mix of people. And I think in the end, the group is robust and diverse. Just looking at the numbers of folks, there are 5 folks that you would identify as being part of academia, all of whom are really bona fide members of UCA&R in some way or shape or another, although there are some public health folks there. Mainstream agricultural representatives, 3 representatives from the environmental justice community, several people who from the government, including USDA, and several registrants. I know there was some concern. Was this a fair and balanced group? And what I can tell you is that, one, the tone of the entire conversation has been convivial. So it's not, we haven't even had to ask people to put aside their weapons at the door. People have naturally done that as part of this. There's a genuine curiosity amongst different interests in the room about how to actually do this. Naturally, some of the representatives in the room are interested in a very different vision of agriculture than the one that we see day in and day out in California today. Is it wrong to have hopes and dreams? It's not for me to say, but their views are well represented. But they're also well balanced by the views of people who have their fingers on the pulse of agriculture as it exists today, as it deals with the markets of today, as it deals with the conditions of today, the pests of today.
Question, can you
course.
tell us where the list is of those members?
You know, I didn't put it in the PowerPoint. I have it right here, and I'm happy to share, leave it for you to share. It's a public list. I will say that it is the nature, it's a very interesting group. One other thing I think you'll find, and those of you in agriculture will understand this, that when we talk about how to manage an individual pest, it's a technical problem. It has to do with the life cycle of that insect. It has to do with where it feeds and how does it affect the ecosystem of the way we conduct agriculture. And that's a very different mindset or framework that you might have if you were looking at what was the environmental or public health impact of a particular active ingredient. So in one case you're looking at, you know, sort of its agronomic effect, in another case you're looking at a broader social effect. And so you can imagine that it's very difficult to bring the respective experiences and mindsets of people who look at the problem so differently into harmony in a very short-term process. So we're going to do what we can, but I can also give you good news right now. There's a strong appetite within this group to continue on in some form under some sort of leadership or championship to begin to have a more robust mutual understanding between affected communities and agriculture about how we can live together, prosper together, and grow our good fruits and vegetables in a way which generates widespread support. I consider that very good news indeed. Let me just give you a sense of the time frames. We had our first meeting in October. We are interspersing those with subgroup calls. They've been happening. In fact, I have one today that's going to be looking at providing additional capacity for IPM within the University of California and in the field. We're meeting tomorrow as a large group to refine our recommendations. Out of this will be distilled a handful of recommendations. In a minute, I'll show you the structure, which we'll be carrying out to a series of public meetings and public input sessions. They'll be held, one here in Sacramento, one in Fresno, and one in Ventura. The idea is to take these preliminary recommendations out to the field, see what the public thinks. We're hoping to have robust engagement both by our friends in affected communities as well as in agriculture, and hopefully have a productive conversation. Public meetings are always a little bit crazy that way. We'll see how we can structure them so that they can be as productive as they can be. Forgive me for speaking honestly with you, but as friends, it seems more productive. After we've had the public input sessions, we'll take that data back to the work group in a form of a series of subgroup calls. We'll meet again in March to look at the final document, to make edits to it. And then our hope is to have the plan fully blessed and released to the public and released actually to the agencies who are the owners of the document by the end of April. What are we talking about that's at stake? I wanted just to give you a sense of some of the pests for which there are limited or no alternatives currently known for chlorpyrifos. And in some ways, I could list the pests, I could list the crop pest combinations, but I think I would just draw your attention to two pests, because I think they've really, a lot of the chlorpyrifos use have been targeted at these two pests. One were sugar-feeding ants. So, anytime I work in this field, it's always a graduate level class in entomology, and what we learned very quickly is there are two classes of ants, sugar-feeding and protein-feeding ants. Sugar-feeding ants naturally are drawn to the sugars and saps that we find in citrus and grapes, they're very problematic. They are one of the pests for which we have no good alternative for chlorpyrifos, and a lot of attention will be placed on them. The other area is aphids. Aphids are particularly problematic in a number of crops, but for our friends who grow cotton, late season aphids and whiteflies are two pests that are closely associated with the problems of sticky cotton, which makes cotton unable to be ginned properly, rejected, and otherwise no longer economic. So this list is a short subset. In the UC pest management guidelines, there were some 122 crops that were identified where chlorpyrifos was an AI that could be used. It wasn't necessarily the top one, but there were 122 of those crops. And now we're working our way through where are the crops for which there are limited or no alternatives. Now, when we talk about limited, we also need to understand that, as you well know, that in good pest management, active ingredients are rotated so that we do not develop resistance to individual chemistries. And that resistance can be to specific chemicals like chlorpyrifos, or even classes of chemicals like neonicotinoids or pyrethroids. Clearly, what's happening by pulling an organophosphate out of the mix, that for some crops, their rotational options are going to be very limited. Our friends in almonds have told us that although they're concerned about leaf-footed bug and stink bugs, that they have alternative AIs to use, but they're going to lose some of their rotational capacities and some of their flexibility. So I list these here. As you know, you deal with such an incredible bounty and diversity of crops in your role here, that you're more aware than I am of the enormity of the job of trying to understand how to shepherd all of these effectively. In the end, the group will come up with a short table of what looks to be the most important gaps, if you would, and we'll use that to develop recommendations around research. But one of the core recommendations that will come out of the group will be for the University of California and IPM to update their guidelines more robustly with new guidance to take into consideration the elimination of this particular AI. That work's already underway in some guises already. Let's talk a little bit about how it appears the action plan is starting to unfold, because this will give you a sense of where you might expect to see alternatives. As I've said, there will be a very simple and straightforward table based on the work of our colleagues at the University of California and people with field experience about the currently available alternatives. The one thing that we will be doing, because the group does include registrants who represent traditional sort of chemistries and the biopesticide industry, that list will be enhanced by a number of biopesticides that may not have currently been on the list from the University of California. There are, happily, a number of near-term alternatives that are in the pipeline within the Department of Pesticide Regulation. I'm not sure that it's possible to speed those up, but to the extent that the registrants are willing to publicly disclose that they're in the pipeline, and to the extent that we're able to make recommendations, that's an area of interest. One of the areas of recommendation will have to do with outreach. It'll work on two fronts. One will be about how to contact growers about the changes to chlorpyrifos, and the other will be about education for PCAs, crop advisors, and others about how to think about pest management without this particular AI. Institutional capacity building having to do with our capacity to develop robust IPM strategies, very consistent with your work on biologically integrated farming systems. Regulatory improvements, what can be done to make the system work better, basic and applied research priorities. There will be a section on alternative agronomics, and I want to underline this again, that the work group is made up of a diversity of perspectives about what constitutes the future of agriculture. And there are strong voices with well-researched backgrounds that are providing perspectives that suggest that we've under-examined alternatives in the fields of agroeconomics and more integrated approaches that work with natural systems as opposed to trying to constrain their natural flow. So there will be, no doubt, some recommendations that come out from that group. From that perspective, I'd say. Let me stop for a second and talk about consensus. This report, the goal is to have it be a report in which the members ideally consents to. But because of the short time frame that we're operating on, we're only meeting 3 times. We have a total of maybe a half a dozen contacts with them. What we're not going to try to go for perfect consensus. If there are strongly held divergent views, they will be captured and reflected in the report. So I suspect that in the area, for example, of alternative agronomics, that there will be another perspective sidebar that talks about some of the limits that members see in those approaches. And then finally, they'll talk about the longer-term additional work. If I have any consistent message in all of the years that I have been in front of you as a friend and a colleague and an ally, it's been that if we want to avoid conflict, we have to have dialogue. And that often means sitting down with people whose views are very different than ours. And I'm sure one of the recommendations coming out from that will be for you to continue to be the champions of that kind of dialogue. So with that, that's the basic overview. I want to stop and respond to any questions you may have and go from there.
Sure. You know, I'd like to thank you. A great presentation, and I know that's a difficult task you have there, putting the group together. But I guess my question is, do you foresee this group continuing on with other products that may come up in the future? Do you think this is a one-time and done, or?
Great question.
Because I kind of think it's going to be a continuous issue.
What I can tell you is only the sort of the letter of the law, which is that Ag Innovations is a contract to complete this work that goes through the 4th to April 30th. And after that, we are under no obligation to continue to work with the group. Do I personally think that it would be wise for this department and its colleagues in the Newsom administration to think about how to continue a group like this, maybe with some adjustments in terms of its members around these topics? I can say unequivocally yes.
Thank you. It's great to see you again.
It is, Nancy. Thank you.
I had a question. When you said the end of the calendar year, did you mean 2019?
No, 2020.
Okay,
Forgive
thank
me.
you.
Yeah. The chemical will be allowed to be used through the end of 2020 under the permit restrictions that were in place for 2019. And one of the things that you should know, and you probably do know, is that based on preliminary data, which the Department of Pesticide Regulation was not comfortable yet releasing publicly, I can tell you that the 2018 use of chlorpyrifos that occurred under those restrictions had a precipitous decline. I would expect to see the same in 2019.
Thanks. Thanks, Joseph. Two questions. The first is the group envisioning any kind of sort of emergency scenarios where a crop would fail so you showed crops where there are no alternatives, but is anybody in there saying, look, I'm out of business because of this, or can no longer grow this crop?
Not in so many words, Eric, but I think it's a subtext. I think that, let's just take the sugar-feeding ants. They throw the whole IPM program in almonds, in citrus rather, off. And so it gets to be an interesting question. Now, it's important to know that the granular application of chlorpyrifos, which is sometimes used for ant control, has not been canceled. And so my expectation is there'll be some new attempts to use the chemical that way. There's also some promising technology of placing chlorpyrifos in a hydrogel solution that appears to be very close to being ready. But we haven't heard exactly that. I would say our friends in cotton expressed the most concern.
Okay. The second question is there any participation from chemical manufacturers in this process? In other words, is there some signal being sent back to manufacturers to sort of probe their development process or trigger development of products that could become alternatives?
Great question. Dave Lawson with Western Plant Health Association is our main conduit back to the registrant community, and has been our best source of research, of knowledge and information about what is in the pipeline. So I would say yes, there is an ongoing communication. Pam Marone also sits on the group and has been in contact with her biopesticide colleagues.
A quick follow-up.
Can I comment on that, though, before you ask your next question?
Sure.
But remember, the chemical companies often look at number of acres that pesticide can be applied. And if you look at asparagus, not going to be there. They look at almonds, that's a good deal. So,
right.
So they're looking where the dollars are, and a lot of these small specialty crops are not going to be on their list.
Just a data point for folks to consider. So, I don't know how many chemical manufacturers there are, but there's a handful of big ones, right? There's Corteva, Bayer, and Syngenta, I think, are the three biggest. Two of those have merged in the last 12 months. And so they're effectively kind of new companies. And in the case of Corteva and Bayer, both have reached out to EDF for input into their quote-unquote sustainability plans. So I'm just putting it out there. It appears to us, that there's an opportunity to, influence, some of how they're doing business. And so anyways, it's just something to be aware of. It might be something that the board, considers featuring in a future meeting, having some of those companies talk about their plans for ensuring the sustainability of their products.
Yeah, no, it's a good idea. Thanks, Eric. Ashley?
Well, first off, thank you. I'm so glad that you are in this group facilitating such a diverse group of interests. That's excellent. And I also just want to applaud that the three departments are doing this, because we really need to get off this cycle of where we ban something and then something gets replaced that's equally as bad or also causing problems. So trying to get out in front so that the things that we do reintroduce in the future are more benign and safer, I think is long overdue. So I'm delighted that it's happening, and I hope it does continue. To Eric's point, I would definitely echo that. I think it's a really good idea to try to engage the companies as directly as possible, because they've got to want to get out of the same cycle. I had a quick question on, in the action plan, it's about short-term and then long-term actions. I'm sort of wondering about the midterm, you know?
Yeah, I would say that the long term here is midterm. It's research that can be conducted over the next several years that would actually directly address
I guess I'm
issues.
wondering, the 12 months when it's banned.
Right.
And then the
5
5
year.
years when the actions actually maybe start bearing some fruit. What happens in that interim time? What are the...
Ashley, I wish I could tell you. I wish I could tell you. I think it's what we know is that, let me give you an example. Our friends in the almond industry have said that what they need for leaf-footed bug is more basic research into the entomology of the insect itself, its life cycle. There's no shortcut for actually that basic research. There's not going to be a good short-term fix for that, because frankly we don't know enough about the life cycle of the bug to know where it is useful to try to intervene. If you're talking about crops that are at risk from things that are very time sensitive, so cotton, it's all late season. It happens right when you're about to make or break your case. I think again it's an industry that is going to have to look at a wide variety of alternative practices, and there could potentially be crop losses. I haven't heard that specifically mentioned, like we're worried about it, but it is implied in our dialogues.
I just wanted to thank you from a production agriculture side. I think it's extremely important that we're sitting in a room with all these groups of people. The more they know about how we operate, I think, we may not always like the results, but I think it makes for a better environment. And I congratulate you. It's not easy, and keep up the good work.
Okay, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you again, Joseph.
Every time I guess I hear a presentation like this, I'm reminded about how important SB 499 is. School meals, California grown for kids, because California farmers grow food and fiber the way Californians want it grown, the way we require it to be grown. Right. And it's not a lot of consolation, but it may be some consolation that it's only consistent then that the kids that eat our food eat food that's grown consistent with the way we require farmers to farm.
Thank you for
Bryce.
them.
Appreciate it.
For that, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Joseph. All right, we're going to move.
I'll make sure you get it.
We're going to move on to industrial hemp. I apologize. We're not going to move to industrial hemp. We're going to move to our panel discussion on California Healthy Soils Week, which is much more important. So we have Undersecretary Jenny Lester Moffett, Gatika Joshi with the CDFA Office of Environmental Farming and Innovation, and Kathy Bergen with the UC Extension Merced. If you'll join us, Jenny, you're going to lead?
Yeah, I'll lead, and I'm actually going to just do a little follow-up on the presentation that Joseph just gave on the Alternatives Work Group. First thing, before he walks out the door, I just want to recognize Joseph. When we received the funding for convening this work group, the first person that came into, I think, all of our mind was Joseph. We knew that this is no easy task. We have a very diverse group that I think Crystal's looking at now, and I shared the link with Josh, and he can send it around to the board. It's posted online. But someone with the background, both the expertise and also the background and the knowledge of the industry and all the stakeholders, and just the dynamic facilitation skills that Ag Innovations has is just important. So Joseph and the whole team, because there's quite a team at Ag Innovations that has been working on this, thank you guys for that work. And whether or not we have continued funding to keep this going, we certainly have a continued commitment, Ashley, to maintain and continue the robust dialogue that we have between CDFA, Department of Pesticide Regulation, and Cal EPA. Certainly, we have active conversations always on that.
Where did the funding come from, if you can say?
It was general fund funding. So part of the budget package that was approved by the legislature, signed by the governor of the spring, had $5.7 million for chlorpyrifos cancellation. Of that money, some was for the work group. A lot of the money is actually coming, $2.2 million is coming to the Department for the Biologically Integrated Farming Systems Program. Another $1 million is coming for research. The Department of Pesticide Regulation has some money for research as well. So there is funding for research as well as alternatives, but this work group is definitely key in all of that. So thank you. Now I'll kick off Healthy Soils Week conversation. Although, Dawn, I'm not sure. Industrial hemp has all of us talking a lot lately. So healthy soils is definitely got a lot of us talking. So back in 2015, many of you who've been board members here for some time recall that the United Nations declared 2015 the year of the soils. At that same time, the Department of Food and Ag, actually the governor at that time, announced the Healthy Soils Interagency Initiative as well. So we've been busy in California since then. Geetika Joshi is going to talk about, with our Office of Environmental Farming and Innovation, she's going to talk about the work that we've been doing, rolling out some really great funding that we have received through the Healthy Soils program. So she's going to be talking about that. And then Katty Bergen with UC Cooperative Extension is going to talk about the role, the really important role of the boots on the ground, the technical assistance, the partners with the farmers and ranchers in the field, applying for the grants, but then also implementing practices on the field. So we've been busy in those avenues. We've also been busy in that we just in January incorporated soils into our natural and working lands climate strategy for the first time ever. So we've been busy definitely on the programmatic side, on the policy side as well, really bringing soils to the forefront in a lot of the work that we're doing in climate policy, in water policy, really in agricultural policy as a whole, because we know a lot of you guys who work your soil every day know the very important role of soils in everything that you're doing. So just because 2015 stopped, we did not stop our work. We continue to engage with partners around the state, around the country, around the globe. And one of the big things that we are working on now, if I can figure out how to advance the slide, is those partnerships. And the partnerships that we've formed, this week is a week to celebrate soils. Actually, so when 2015 ended, the United Nations declared December 5th the World Soils Day. So we have a Global Soils Day, but here in California, because we go big on everything, we decided to celebrate all week long. So this is really about showcasing the work that farmers and ranchers are doing in the field, the role that the state has played in partnering with farmers and ranchers, both with funding and also technical assistance, and then also all of the partners, the nonprofit partners, our ag industry partners who have been playing a very important role as well. So yesterday we cut the ribbon in front. This is actually a banner from 2 years ago. We celebrated Healthy Soils like 2 years ago as well. So we cut a ribbon. Secretary Ross, along with Carlos Suarez, a key partner for all of us with the United States Department of Ag, NRCS, and then also Senator Eggman, with chair of our Senate Ag Committee as well, joined in celebrating and kicking off Healthy Soils Week. Today, this afternoon, we're going to be bringing a bunch of our partners, so folks that have received funding for our Healthy Soils program, both our farmer incentive program as well as demonstration project. They're going to be talking about and sharing the work that they're doing with that funding at a legislative briefing this afternoon. You're all welcome to join. Wednesday, again, with partnership with our state agencies, Cal Recycle is going to be doing some education with the legislature. On Thursday, Many of our nonprofit partners and industry partners are hosting a tour of both a composting facility as well as, I think, 2 farms. And then Friday is really a social media blitz, because the key thing here is that we're really hitting audiences, not just in the legislature, not just in our communities, but also online, that we're talking about the work that we're doing, the work really that the farmers and ranchers, the land managers are doing, and celebrating that work, and then celebrating and recognizing the partnerships that make that work happen. And so we have many partners here in the room today. And really this is about, while the Department of Food and Ag is convening everyone together, it's really about bringing and elevating the work that everyone else is doing. So here's some of our social media stuff that we have. You'll be starting to see that. You'll actually already have seen a lot of this if you get our Planting Seeds blog, which I'm sure all of you guys do. But again, it's really about highlighting the role of farmers, ranchers, and the work that they're doing. So if I can figure out how to play it, there's a video.
So with healthy soil, it's not
With a
just
farmer
about
that we know.
creating a good walnut. I mean, it certainly is. There are other benefits to it. It makes our job easier as farmers. We use less inputs. We sink more water. We create better nutrient density in our food. But at the same time, with healthy soil and with a no-till organic system, we're trying to use these trees to pull carbon out of the atmosphere and sink it into the soil, where we hope that it stays. What's good for the soil is generally good for us. So every improvement we can make down here comes forth up here in better food, less inputs, better moisture and water retention, less pest pressure. So in our Healthy Soils project, we implemented cover crop and composting. In just 2 years, we're already seeing bumps in our soil organic matter. If we are increasing that, we're both increasing our sink, the amount of carbon that we can hold in the soil, and our store, the amount of carbon that we're putting into the soil. The Healthy Soils program really affirms these practices: composting, cover crop, no tillage, habitat, hedgerow restoration. These are all things that we want to engage with, we really believe in, and the Healthy Soils program gives us both the financial and some institutional support to enact them.
So definitely, you guys have a flyer about the stuff that's going on this week. Join us in whatever you'd like to join us in. Join us online as well. This is really a crowdsourcing effort, bringing all the stakeholders who want to participate and be part of this and host their own local events. And it would not have been done without Joyce, who is over here. She has been our ringleader, keeping us all on track and keeping this crowdsourcing effort together. So thank you, Joyce, for the work that you've done. So next up is Geetika, and Geetika is going to talk about our Healthy Soils program.
Good morning, President Cameron, members of the board, and everyone here in the audience. We're so excited to share some updates on the Healthy Soils program as part of this Healthy Soils Week. So this program has been around since 2016-17. That was the first year that the department received funding to administer this program. And primarily, this program incentivizes management practices that can build that soil carbon and reduce greenhouse gas emissions through both direct incentives that are provided to farmers and ranchers, as well as demonstration projects, which involve showcasing of the practices and farmer-to-farmer education in partnership with universities, nonprofits, and RCDs as well. There are a variety of practices, 28 and counting, that are currently incentivized through this program. And primarily, there are 4 different ways by which they help in increasing soil carbon, either by adding soil-rich amendments to the soil and managing the soil, such as compost and cover crop or mulching, establishing herbaceous or woody cover, so both those types of plants and trees add biomass and carbon back to the soil, And then there are practices that are specifically designed for grazing lands and pasture as well, such as prescribed grazing. So just very quickly, an overview of the program. The program first started in 2016-17 with $7.5 million in funding, followed by $15 million in funding in 2018-19, which came from both the Cap and Trade program as well as Prop 68. And for this coming year of 2020, the department has received $28 million again from the Greenhouse Gas Fund, or the Cap and Trade program. Currently, we are anticipating having a public comment period to hear stakeholder input on the program, and also anticipate going out with the solicitation in early next year, January or February. And the graph here just kind of shows in the bars the funding amount, and those lines are the number of projects. So as we got more funding, we've been able to fund a lot more projects with that. Again, just a very quick overview. Through the incentive programs, initially started with $50,000 grant awards, went up to $75,000, and has so far funded 268 projects where the practices are implemented over 23,000 acres and a greenhouse gas reduction of 38,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalents. There is a map in the middle, which is a little faint on this slide on the screen. Just shows the statewide distribution of projects all the way from Del Norte to San Diego counties. And the two pie charts just really show you which practices are more popular. So on the one that's on top, those three really big parts of the pie are compost application, cover crops, and hedgerows. People really seem to like those, but there's a bunch of other practices that we've funded as well. And the bottom pie just kind of shows in that big blue part of the pie, that's about 41% of the projects have been on small farms under 50 acres in size. But also the second biggest part is green, it's over 1,000 acre farms. So really a wide distribution of farm size by acreage where these projects are going in. Demonstration projects are of two types. The first type conduct not only demonstration and outreach, but also collect greenhouse gas data, which over time can inform the way we calculate greenhouse gas emissions attributed to agriculture. And type B projects focus primarily on demonstration and outreach. So currently there's 49 funded projects with $5.4 million in funding. They do have a smaller number of greenhouse gas reduction, about 3,000 tons. That's because demonstration plots tend to be a lot smaller than incentives projects, which go out on large parts of the farm. But really the main focus and theme, overarching theme that you've already heard from our Undersecretary as well, is technical assistance and the role that technical assistance providers have played in the success of this program thus far. So just a little bit of context. The program first started, and we've always had technical assistance available for farmers and ranchers who wanted to apply to the program. Initially, we received funding from USDA and RCS, and over the years, we've received funding from Strategic Growth Council, the Cap and Trade dollars, as well as Prop 68 to fund technical assistance providers. We've provided these funds through competitive grants. RCDs, nonprofits, as well as university cooperative extensions have been able to apply and receive this funding, and then assist farmers and ranchers in preparing their applications and submitting. The grant size also over the years went up from $5,000 to $20,000 per grant. Some of this changed last year when in 2018 a new bill passed called AB 2377, and that really just formalized and mandated that CDFA must have a technical assistance program, not only for supporting healthy soils applicants, but also for our other climate smart ag programs, SWEEP, and alternative manure management program. And also this legislation expanded the scope of technical assistance from just helping folks apply to the program to also help them in planning and implementing their projects. So before the grant and then after the grant support as well to help all of the growers. Minimum of 5% of any funds that are appropriated to CDFA from Cap and Trade program are now carved out for this particular technical assistance piece. And we have grants of up to $60,000 annually for 3 years per program. So we had the very first round of funding solicitation through this new program earlier this year, and in November we announced the awards, and total 33 organizations have been awarded funds to provide technical assistance for healthy soils and alternative manure management program participants. and it totals about $2.1 million. Majority of the technical assistance providers are serving the Healthy Soils program, all 33 of them, whereas 8 out of those 33 are also helping with manure management. This kind of makes sense because expertise in pasture and ranching and rangeland management is not as widespread as it is for field crops and annual row crops. So once again, just kind of an overview. Over the years, CDFA has increased the number of technical assistance providers. For the very first time, we started with 13 of them with a funding of $65,000. In the most recent round of Healthy Soils funding, we had 39 providers with $275,000 in funding. For the coming year of 2020, as I mentioned earlier, we have 32 or maybe 33. I might have missed that number. That number seems lower, but there's a lot more funding in dollars now available because it really enhances and increases the scope of assistance that they will be providing. On the right bottom, you can see there's just a snapshot of how technical assistance went last time. Of the 222 folks who applied for funding, 150 received help from a technical assistance provider, and 136 of them were successful in funding. So that just really goes on to show how much the success of someone getting a grant goes up by receiving that technical assistance, and highlights the importance of having that support. The map on the left just shows all of the counties in which we've had technical assistance providers so far. So we really do have a really great wide coverage of technical assistance providers, especially between RCDs and UC cooperative extensions, but also nonprofits. And lastly, as of last year, CDFA has also made an agreement with the University of California Cooperative Extension specifically with $1.1 million in funding to support 9 specialized positions known as community education specialists. They are dedicated to providing assistance for climate-smart agriculture programs at CDFA. And this map on the right, it's taken directly from their website. All the colored counties show where their community education specialists are located and the counties that they're serving currently. So in conclusion, just kind of really highlighting all of the partnerships that are necessary for making soil health happen in California. And you can see 3 out of those 5 boxes are technical assistance providers. So really just underlining, once again, their importance and critical role in the success of the program. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. Are we doing questions now or later? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Go ahead, Nancy. Just one. We don't want to get too far behind here, but go ahead.
So we certainly thank you for those increased numbers, but has anyone ever considered that we could just make the application a lot simpler?
Absolutely. That is such a great question that keeps coming back to us every time the program goes out. Over the years, we've tried really hard to simplify the application, and in the coming round, I think we're going above and beyond all of the feedback that we've received in the past. We will be going out with a draft for public comment pretty soon, and hope to get some positive feedback then. But highlighting the biggest one that we kept hearing were all the essay-type questions, and we've worked really hard to eliminate essay-type questions, make it a much more streamlined application. We're also hoping that folks will not need to jump back and forth from several different websites that they need to pull data from and have it all available in one place. Hopefully, steps like that would make it a much more streamlined process that's less confusing. So we're looking forward to that.
And I compliment you on making it a lot simpler from when it originally got started.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Made major strides.
Thank you.
Two. So one is I really appreciated that part of the TA process was to make it easier, but also to increase the diversity of the grant recipients. Could you talk a little bit, you talked about size, which was one really important piece of that diversity. Could you talk a little bit about ethnicity?
Yes.
On that. And then the second one is, given that Healthy Soils and this incredible program that you guys are managing is certainly a pillar of ecological pest management, I'm wondering if there are lessons that you're learning in the work that you're doing in Healthy Soils that might actually be shared with the Chlorpyrifos Alternatives Work Group that we just heard from, given that there are certainly some really interesting innovations, particularly in cotton in the South, around using cover crops and other things to address pests.
Great. So I'll take the first question, which is related to another legislation that passed in 2017 called the Farmer Equity Act of 2017. And that legislation defines socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers using criteria such as ethnicity. So 2018, which was the most recent round of Healthy Soils funding that we went through, was the very first round in which we started with collecting that data and prioritizing applicants for award based on their self-reported and self-identification as a socially disadvantaged farmer or rancher. I'm able to go back and I could follow up. I don't have the numbers right at the top of my head, but we did prioritize those who identified, projects are reviewed and scored, and then socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers were prioritized for funding. So currently, because this legislation is so new, we've just had that one round. That particular round was not only meant to award folks, but also kind of serve as a means of collecting some of that data so that over the years we'll kind of get a much better sense of where we're at in those terms. In terms of the second question, that kind of speaks to some of those demonstration projects that are under the Type A category. Those projects are required to collect data on the field. Program requirement is for greenhouse gas data, but since a lot of the recipients of those projects are university and research professors, members of academia, there are many other metrics of soil quality and agronomy that are being collected on those projects. So some of those could potentially speak to the question on pests. Once again, the first round of funding went out in 2017, and these are 3-year projects. So come next year, we'll start getting final reports on some of these projects and start to see what kind of data is out there, in addition to greenhouse gases, what we've seen on pests, and think about potentially how to share that information. So it's something that's definitely on our radar, and we're hoping to get there pretty soon with the first round of funded projects. Great, thank you.
All right, good morning. Thank you, Gitika, for talking about the background of the Healthy Soils program. I'm here to briefly share some of my experiences working as a technical assistance provider for the Climate Smart Agriculture programs, which include Healthy Soils. I live and work in Merced in the Central Valley, and I'm a member of the cohort of, there's actually 10 of us now throughout the state who provide full-time assistance around Climate Smart Agriculture. It's a partnership. I work for UC Cooperative Extension, working with these CDFA programs, but it's really been, I think, a good thing to work with in the Cooperative Extension that already has the embedded relationships in these communities and already has the existing ties with local farmers that we've been able to use. So I'd like to speak today about from my experience, the 2 main reasons why technical assistance has been so important to the success of the Healthy Soils program. The first one is most growers have still never heard of Healthy Soils program in California. It's been around since 2016, but I would say 95% or more of the growers I speak with have still never heard of it. So a lot of what my cohort has been doing in this first year is really a lot of outreach and education around the program itself. So this includes anything from, we've done a lot of work with existing community partners who work with growers. We've partnered, a number of my colleagues work with the resource conservation districts. We meet with the farm bureaus, grower cooperatives, and then a lot of just one-on-one meetings with interested growers. We go out to the fields and meet with them, and I think this, especially from the equity standpoint of working with small farmers or farmers that speak limited or no English, has been really important to be able to go out to the fields and meet them there. So this summer, for example, I speak Spanish, so I would go out to the fields, informal networks of growers, and they would be packing peppers, and we would be standing there talking about cover cropping or composting, and really meeting people where they're at has been an important part of our first year, and doing that education. And the other piece of that is a lot of the practices behind Healthy Soils are very new to people. And so, a grower is, if they are pretty unlikely, if they've never seen cover cropping in almonds before, they're pretty unlikely to spontaneously want to adopt this the next year. So we've been able to also facilitate a lot of the demonstration that happens to get growers interested in some of these practices. For example, I have a colleague down in Ventura County who wanted to be here today at this meeting, but she's actually hosting a field day around cover crops right now, where she's planted a number of varieties that are ready right now for growers to go out and see, ask questions about, and then they'll be ready by the time the Healthy Soils application opens up in February to know kind of how they want to do that on their own fields. So a lot of that background education is what we've been doing this year, getting people ready to apply to these programs. So the second piece, which I think was touched on, is we actually help with the application itself, which is very complicated. So we provide one-on-one technical assistance with the physical application. It's an online application. A lot of growers that I have interacted with barely use email. So to be able to do greenhouse gas calculator spreadsheets and all the different tools is pretty difficult, and it's time consuming. And a lot of growers are obviously, busy managing their land, running their business. So we come in and we're able to help with that as well. So for example, right now we're in the middle of working on the SWEEP grants, which are around irrigation efficiency. So that could range from growers calling us on the phone in the office and answering a few questions to last week, actually, I literally brought my laptop out to I had a small Southeast Asian grower to his field. He had set up 2 chairs under his persimmon trees. We made a Wi-Fi hotspot and we did his application there. So it's a lot of being flexible and working with them sort of on a lot of the little details that to go with this. And then particularly with Healthy Soils, as it's a 3-year program, to be there for the follow through and implementation of when growers have questions about what's going wrong with their cover cropping, what can they do differently next year, the reporting aspect to CDFA. All of that is what we're there for. So I would say, overall, it's been a really exciting first year for us to be able to be part of ramping up the education aspect, getting growers excited about it, and I hope that we can be there for the next few years to actually help it be a success. So I'm here to answer any questions about it as well.
All right. Do we have questions for Katie or any of the other 2 presenters we had?
I have a quick question. And congratulations to you for being bilingual and speaking Spanish. But I'm curious, with the growing number of Asian, Southeast Asian farmers, and I imagine some of the same challenges with technology, are you seeing a need for linguistic capacity for meeting the needs of that community?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think we certainly need a lot more bilingual or multilingual technical assistance providers. I have been able to do assistance in Spanish, but a lot of working with the Southeast Asian growers has required me to coordinate with translators. I think we have one person in Cooperative Extension who speaks fluent Hmong and is able to do a lot of that, but we certainly
well, as a follow-up to that, I'm hoping that, and I'd be happy to play a role in connecting with some of the local nonprofit organizations that can help serve as the translation piece to it, and I think it would be of absolute value for all parties involved.
Absolutely, that'd be great.
I just want to make a commercial here. So the latest research that I've been apprised of says that if we would just increase soil matter from 1% to 3%, we could sequester 1 trillion tons of greenhouse gases in 10 years. And the carbon clock is ticking, and it tells us we have a little less than that. So I just want you to know what you're doing is extremely important work, and we thank you.
Very good. Anyone else?
Yeah, quick question. I'm curious about, and I'm not exactly sure which of you is the right to answer this question, but the quantification of the climate benefit of this work. What can you just say briefly what mechanisms or what methodologies you're using, and who are the audiences for that? And by associated with that question about audiences, is the legislature asking for sort of precise quantification, and so there's some accountability there that you're.
Yeah. So currently the Healthy Soils program uses a tool known as Comet Planner. This tool was originally developed by the USDA NRCS, and it really balances the precision but also with ease of use. There is another version of Comet that is even more precise than the Comet Planner called Comet Farm that can go down to individual farm level, but it's really cumbersome to fill in all of the inputs and outputs and would be a challenge for farmers and ranchers applying to our programs. So we opted for the Comet Planner approach, which is really simple to use. It's based on regional scale, so for California, it's at the county level. And all an applicant needs to do is select their county, select the practice they're implementing, enter in acres, and it calculates greenhouse gas reductions based on that input information. And behind Comet Planner and Comet Farm is the day-cent model, if that's the question that you have.
And ARB is the quantification guru, and so they have worked with this and they have blessed it. And anytime there's an update, they're involved with that. So we have that kind of rigor built into the system.
Just one other follow-up, which is that I was pleased to see that the hedgerow woody deal was one of the more popular elements, and but not only that practice, but probably most of the other practices have some benefit for biodiversity, and I know it's an additional cost to sort of measure that, but I think sort of some sort of communication or evaluation of the biodiversity benefits of this program would be really advantageous.
We might have to consult with you on that.
There we go. The Air Resources Board quantification methodology guru, for sure. They're also working on, what are they called, co-benefits or additional benefits, and I would hope that biodiversity is one of those as well, that they would be adding into what is being calculated as far as the benefits.
Go ahead, Bryce.
Thank you for the presentations on healthy soil. What an exciting subject, and how critically important. And thank you for your comment, Nancy. I was wondering if you could comment on, and not to be controversial, but cover crops and orchards. I would love to hear that you reference that, Caddy. And I've heard some say, no to cover cropping in orchards because of cleanliness and water efficiency. I've heard, and in your presentation, or that video, is great to see cover cropping in orchards for carbon sequestration, for water retention. So, I mean, I've heard both, right? That it wastes water and it actually, though, improves water retention. And then others would say for beneficials, for pest management, that the beneficials are good. Where do you come down on that, or do you come against a lot of people that would say no, just no to cover crops and orchards, or is that becoming more of an important production practice?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of opinions on it. I think there's a lot more research coming out now showing the benefits of it in orchard systems, and now what's catching up is the management practices, being able to do that, like you said, having the clean floors for almonds by the time they're harvesting, and being able to manage it with drought-tolerant varieties to use very little extra water used throughout the year. So I think it's becoming a lot more popular, and especially with these incentives programs, people are willing to risk trying it for a few years and figuring out what works for them.
Some of the early research really was based on Midwest cropping systems, where the seeds there would be very different than in California. And so there's a lot more, as Caddy said, there's a lot more research that's coming out on California-based seeds that are more appropriate for winter cover crop and then summer die-off. And, I think additionally, the research that, I'm not sure if it's the same research that Nancy's referencing, but there was some research also that came out about the nexus of soil organic matter and water holding capacity. So really starting to understand that nexus as well. I think if we increase soil organic matter by 1% statewide, we hold something like 1.7 million acre feet of water, additional water in the soil profile. So it's a pretty significant amount of water that there's savings as well through that soil organic matter.
I'm not sure how to ask this, so I'll just, there have been 317 projects at 17.8 million, and that's 23,000 acres, which is a drop in the bucket in terms of what we have in the state. And you've probably heard this before, but how does that filter down? That we've got, it's just a huge step, and so you have to start somewhere, and when you have an application process that is very complicated, that discourages people. So
where's the positivity, Don? I'm gonna give it to you.
That's what I'm looking for. I think this is very important. I think it has to get started, but if it requires NGOs for a farmer to do it, it's problematic.
So,
But
yeah.
anyway,
So, because we are doing something new and that hasn't been done other places. So it's like many changes that happen. You have to bring in those people who are willing to be the early adopters and the early champions. And they're willing to be the demonstration projects. And the neighbors will learn from it. We will never have enough money to just make it a blank check, come in and get a grant and go out and do this. We are doing this to collect the data and to learn from one another and to build the compelling business case that I know is there. Because if we want that change to happen, it has to take off. So we're all about scaling up. It took us 2 years just to get any funds into this program at all. We had a great meeting yesterday with the state conservationists about how we better align the NRCS programs and ours on timelines, and then working with all of our people who are out doing these kinds of trainings to be able to just basically co-brand. There's an NRCS program for this, there's the state program for this. And the marketplace itself is going to start driving more of this. We're about getting the early adopters in, collecting the data, having their neighbors see it so that it can take that next leap. So if we can reach, 25%, we also know we're only collecting data on people we're funding. And there are many farmers, and you guys know them all, who are doing some or all of these practices themselves, but we only get to count what we're funding. Is that positive?
That's awesome.
Yeah, and really, I
That's
think-
positive, and my other concern on this too is, as we go down the road, some of this has the potential to get legislated into how we farm, and, and that's just the way it is, but I think this is the right way to go, I mean, but we gotta make sure that it gets advertised and spread across ag.
Right, and I think a lot of the demonstration projects that require participation from other growers to come visit, I think are going to be really helpful. They're going to be able to see it and maybe take portions of it and use it on their own farm. And I think that's what this is all about. It's to get it out there to show people what they can and can't do. They're going to sort through the details. So, but great program. So,
Don, can I just make just one other comment on this theme? Also in this sort of category of sort of data for the board and for the department, there's a lot of, so again, speaking from the perspective of EDF, there isn't a week that goes by now, and this pace has increased over the last 2-3 months, where we're not getting requests from some committee in Congress or some multi-stakeholder coalition for ideas on federal climate legislation, right? So Green New Deal, or there's a select committee on climate change in the House right now. And, so the possibility of some federal legislation in the next 24 months it's not zero. It's not 100%. It's, it's somewhere in between. And the, where the federal election, next November goes is one of the big factors. But, I think California is doing more than any other state, probably most countries, in terms of translating sort of cap and trade revenue or some revenue source into climate benefit. So in the working land sector, it's the Healthy Soils program, and then on the forestry side, it's I don't know what the name of the program is, but it's the a couple $100 million a year going into forests. And so this experience, which will have, if there's federal climate legislation sometime in the next 2 to 5 years, we'll have some running room that is going to be the best data source for influencing that federal legislation. Now, I was talking to Secretary Blumenthal last night, and it was kind of an interesting conversation about how do you translate California experience into something that the rest of the country will actually listen to. And I have a lot of experience saying, oh, we did this in California, and having people in Texas or Iowa say, roll their eyes and say, well, that's exactly what we're not going to do. But, and I'm sure, Secretary Ross, you've faced this before and probably figured out how to get the message across. But I just think that's just one angle, Don, is that if the federal government takes this up, and I think finding ways to implement this in ways that doesn't turn the farmers off is really important, because to Nancy's point, if you get a big proportion of farmers doing these practices, it's going to have an atmospheric benefit. It's going to have co-benefits for biodiversity and everything else. But if we design it incorrectly, then you'll get a low participation rate and you won't get the benefit.
And I just want to close because there's also a lot happening in the private sector with companies who are buyers at the table with NGOs and leading the national farm commodities. And it's easier to do this in the Midwest because you've got large fields of the same crops. They've been doing no-till for decades now. They are now doing cover crops because of water quality runoff issues. So the practices are taking off. The marketplace wants to be there as a buyer to make sure they're rewarding those kinds of practices. So it is happening, and our diversity, when we say Noble Institute, come out and do it in California, our diversity and complexity scares them off. They want to figure it out on those big fields first. Time for lunch.
Yep.
But Eric, to one of your comments, it takes about 7 to 8 years for what happens out here to filter to the south. I mean, they don't like it, but they look and they see what's coming. They know what's coming, it's just a matter of when.
You're very optimistic, Don. No, what I see from the private sector is our buyers are looking for the things that work, with healthy soil. I mean, exactly what we're talking about in these programs. They want to know about it, and they want to use it for their marketing to say that they're working with growers that practice conservation on their farms. So I've had 3 or 4 major food companies come through since early spring, and each one has mentioned that. So and I think that's going to probably drive it even faster than some of the demonstration projects that we see. So believe me, it makes a big difference. So thank you for joining us today. It was very interesting. Good panel. Thank you. We're going to break for lunch. Speakers and board are welcome to join in the room outside and to the left. And we will return sharply at 1 o'clock for our industrial hemp. Stand by.
Industrial hemp.